Thank you, Mr. Vijay Kumar, for that. And ladies and gentlemen, it's now time to hear from Dr. C. Rangarajan for accepting the award, sir. I'll make the mic come to your seat for you to be more comfortable.
Friends, I'm deeply grateful to the TIOL Knowledge Foundation for conferring on me the Financial Fiscal Heritage Award for 2020-24. I'm extremely happy to share this award with Dr. Y.V. Reddy, who worked with me for many years and whom I admire for his talent and skills. The honor of accepting this award is magnified by the presence of thought leaders like Justice Shivkrit Singh, Justice A.K. Patnaik, Shri Harivansh Narayan Singh, and Shri Shailendra Kumar. I am by training a monetary economist. I took many courses in this area and in macroeconomics at the University of Pennsylvania more than 6 decades ago. It was at this time I studied under Professor Bob Summers, father of Larry Summers. Thus, my friendship with Larry Summers goes back to his school days. I thought it was high school days, but he corrected me. No, it was less than high school. It was the school days. I warmly congratulate Larry on the award that he has received this morning. And this is just one among an array of awards he must have received. And I'm happy I could be present here. There is a close relationship between monetary policy and fiscal policy. The tangency point is public borrowing. When governments try to borrow more than what the market will absorb, part of the problem devolves on the monetary authority. Creating or making the central bank create more reserve money and with the consequent impact on inflation. What finally happens depends upon the institutional framework that prevails in a particular country. In fact, one president of the United States said or compared the government to the alimentary canal of a child with voracious appetite at one end and no control at the other. Fiscal dominance is a situation that prevails in many countries. Such a situation prevailed in India also up to the end of 1980s and more particularly in the 1980s. The Indian banking system had a system under which the banks were required to invest a certain proportion of their deposits in government securities. We call it statutory liquidity ratio. By raising the statutory liquidity ratio from time to time, what was facilitated was larger and larger subscription of bank deposits into government securities, facilitating larger borrowing by the government. But in addition to it, because of the mandatory lending on the part of the commercial banks, the rate of interest was also maintained at a lower level, much lower level than what the market will demand. That is why in the middle 1980s, the Chakravarti Committee, of which I wrote a great deal of the report, stipulated that the RBI and the government must come to an understanding at the beginning of each year how much reserve money will be created, and therefore how much money supply will also be created. And the report used the income elasticity of demand for money. Those were the days of monetary targeting, income elasticity of demand for money, and provided a basis for fixing up the money supply growth. There is also another aspect of the monetary and the fiscal system in India, very peculiar to India. Under that system, whenever the cash balance of the government of India fell below a particular level, then automatically the cash balance will be brought up to the level which existed before. And in order to do that, ad hoc treasury bills were issued in favor of the Reserve Bank of India. And what happens? It's a simple, innocuous agreement between the Reserve Bank of India and the government. But the seemingly innocuous provision essentially meant automatic monetization of the fiscal deficit. One of the things I was privileged to do in the early 1990s was to abolish this particular system, so that the system of automatic monetization of the fiscal deficit will go away. At the same time, there was a move to fix the limit on how much the government can borrow, and that is putting a limit on the fiscal deficit of the government of India. There were a lot of discussions as to where and how to fix the limit, but I believe it was decided to fix the limit at 3% of the GDP as the limit of public borrowing by the government of India. A lot of people in India said, oh, this is simply copying Maastricht Treaty, and you have just put 3% of the GDP for the limit on the public borrowing. But that's a mistake. What Maastricht Treaty did and what we did in India is totally different. With the act that was passed in 2003, the limit of 3% was only in relation to the government of India. After the 12th Finance Commission, of which I was chairman, the state legislators all passed similar legislations, and as a result, the limit as far as the government, as far as India was concerned, was 6% of the GDP for government, center, and the states taken together. So, this prescription of something like 6% of the GDP as the limit of fiscal deficit was a step in the right direction. That's a step that should have been undertaken even earlier. Why? There are many reasons, and there are reasons why this 6% limit is justified. The total amount of borrowing that the government can borrow must be related to the transferable savings of the household sector. In India, if we divide the economy into three sectors, government, business, and households. Households are the only surplus sector. The others borrow. Therefore, the extent of borrowing that the government can do depends upon the transferable savings, or what we call normally household savings in financial assets. Sets the limit on how much the other sectors can borrow. And that is why the prescription of a 6% of GDP as a limit for the borrowing by center and the states is appropriate, and the limit should be strictly followed. But I must tell you, as far as the Government of India is concerned, the FRBM Act has been followed more in breach than in observance. In fact, in the whole period since the Act was passed, there was only 1 or 2 years in which the rule has been followed. In all the other years, the law has not been followed because the law had no teeth. And the law only said that if you do not follow, you provide an explanation to the Parliament. Now, explanation to the Parliament is something very easy to give. And since so long they have majority in the Parliament, that is why they run the government, it's all taken care of. So the point really is, more recently there is also a move to say that let us not put a limit on fiscal deficit. Let us put a limit on what they call the debt-GDP ratio. The debt-GDP ratio limit and the fiscal deficit limit are really one and the same. The only way to reduce the debt-GDP ratio is by reducing the fiscal deficit. That is, fiscal deficit is only public borrowing. Only by reducing the public borrowing, the debt-GDP ratio can also be brought down. So I would say, I wrote an article very recently, stick to fiscal deficit as the appropriate fiscal norm of prudence. I think we should continue with it. There's also one other point, and that's where I will end. The point is, the higher the borrowing, the higher the fiscal deficit, the extent of interest payments to the total payments or to the total revenue keeps on increasing. Give you one number. For the center and states taken together, the average for the last 5 years shows interest payments of the state and the central governments as a proportion of total revenue receipts is 24%. Look at some other country. In Japan, it is 5.5%. In UK, it is 6%. And in the United States, it's somewhere around 8.8%. Therefore, the larger the borrowing, the larger the interest payments, and so long as revenue-raising capacity of the governments is, or the potential is not exploited, let us say, then the ratio of expenditures, the interest payments as a proportion of the revenue receipts will be high. And that is one of the reasons why it should be limited. So these are some of the issues that arise between the relationship between monetary policy and fiscal policy, and there is reason for putting some limit on it. In the literature on policy matters, there is one issue that is talked about a great deal, and that is about rules and discretion. Should the states be governed by rules, or should they be governed? There don't be no rules, but governed by fully discretion. don't dismiss it as a simplistic argument, so simplistic issue. It is quite, it has been debated from the angle of whether a liberal society is needed or whether a non-liberal society is needed, or whether the rules should dominate or discretion should dominate. I think rules versus discretion is not the appropriate thing. I think the question is rules and discretion. What is really required is rules with discretion. And this should govern both the management of both monetary policy and fiscal policy. I think I should stop here. I was told that I should speak for 10 minutes. Maybe I might have crossed, but I will stop here. But once again, thank the foundation for giving me the award. And I greatly appreciate the gesture. Thank you very much.